hello there. It's now time for the network disclaimer. The views and opinions of blah, 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 blah do not necessarily reflect blah, 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 talknetwork.com and so on and so forth. Bloody regulations anyway. Now then, let's get on with it, shall we?
The Rebecca Roth Show.
If you're as sick and tired as I was of listening to the mainstream media and even some of those phony alternative news media sites, you'll want to join me. We're going to shed some light on the truth once and for all.
The Rebecca Roth Show, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on Talk Network.
This is TalkNetwork.com.
For Talk Network News, I'm Don Naylor. White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest says the U.S. hopes Canada will continue to be a part of the anti-Islamic State group coalition, despite what Trudeau said on the campaign trail about withdrawing Canada warplanes from the fight.
They've made an important contribution thus far, and we're obviously deeply appreciative of them lending their talent and skill and expertise to that effort. And we hope that we can continue to count on their ongoing support for this very important mission.
Vice President Joe Biden says he won't be a candidate in the coming campaign, but if Democrats are smart, they'll embrace the legacy that he and President Obama have built.
Democrats should not only defend this record and protect this record, they should run on the record.
House Speaker John Boehner says he expects Paul Ryan will get the necessary backing to become Speaker.
He works hard, he's very bright, and he has good relationships, I think, with all the wings of the party. So that's why I think he'll be doing fine.
British Prime Minister David Cameron confirms that a British company has reached an agreement with a Chinese corporation to build a nuclear power plant at Hinkley Point in West England.
And I'm pleased to announce today that we're signing an historic deal to build the Hinkley nuclear power station, providing reliable, affordable energy for nearly 6 million homes and creating more than 25,000 jobs, all the while working together to build a low-carbon future.
And NYPD Commissioner William Bratton says a New York City police officer died after being shot in the head while pursuing a suspect.
I regret to inform you that New York City police officer Randolph Holder, 33 years of age, badge number 13340, a 5-year veteran of the New York City Police Department, was killed in the line of duty, murdered.
For details on these stories and more, go to TalkNetwork.com.
Gold and silver have stood the test of time as a reliable and safe store of value for personal wealth and protection. Precious metals are an excellent way to hedge against risky markets in uncertain times and also provide a low-profile asset for enhanced financial privacy. IDP Consulting Group specializes in pure bullion products for physical delivery or commercial storage of gold and silver products for security and peace of mind. As an asset class, precious metals can never go to zero and have the potential to reward smart investors as global markets increasingly threaten conventional investment strategies. You can call IDP Consulting Group to learn more at 855-860-6800 or visit their website at www.idpconsultinggroup.com. Payment terms are easy and simple, and IDP promptly and discreetly ships all orders within the continental U.S. So call 855-860-6800. That's 855-860-6800 and put a gold and silver lining in your portfolio today.
You, my guardian angel, take my soul of fire.
You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer. Esoteric Hollywood is where I deconstruct the deeper messages, symbols, and predictive programming subtext that underlie modern film. In this show, we will be interviewing artists, experts, and numerous people in media fields. And this will all be based on my years of research in comparative religion, propaganda, psychological warfare, secret societies, and espionage. Esoteric Hollywood decodes the biggest movies in an unparalleled way, from the classics of the silver screen to today's blockbusters. Learn to watch film with completely new eyes as we enter Esoteric Hollywood. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer, and you're listening on TalkNetwork.com. Be sure to go to TalkNetwork.com and check out all of their excellent organic food and supplement products only at TalkNetwork.com, which will link you to Natural News and all the good stuff that Mike Adams has there, as well as all the great articles you can check out at Natural News. This is, as I said, Jay Dyer with from Jay's Analysis, and you're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. Tonight, my guest is Mark Hackard. Mark is a buddy of mine, a really, really intelligent, solid, great dude who runs souloftheeast.org and espionagehistoryarchive.com. Mark, how are you tonight?
I'm good, Jay. Thanks.
Thank you for being here. I'm really glad that you were willing to do this. What Mark and I are going to talk tonight is something a little lighthearted, something a little silly, but also on a serious note. We're going to talk about Cold War. We're going to talk about Mark's work in translations that he's done, and we're going to talk about Hollywood and how there have been all sorts of ludicrous, amusing, and really sort of a circus theatrical presentation of Cold War in different decades of Hollywood, especially from the 50s on into the 80s. And so there's some really goofy ones in the 80s. So we're gonna just talk about a whole mix, a big blender full of all that. But Mark, if you would tell us first about what you do and who you are and your sites.
As you introduced me, I'm Mark Hackard, and I have a BA in Russian from Georgetown University and MA in Russian Studies from Stanford University. And I live and work in California, and on the side, I do translations and also write on subjects like Russian philosophy, Russian history, international relations, geopolitics, espionage. All those things interest me, and the intersections with culture, religious ideas. So I have two projects I'm running, and the first is, as you said, souloftheeast.org, which really covers the gamut of everything from philosophy to culture to geopolitical history, some current foreign policy commentary. If you haven't read souloftheeast.org yet, I encourage you to. It's a cool site, and Jay also writes for it, as well as some of our other friends like Daniel Spalding. So we cover a broad subject area there, but I translate works of Russian philosophy by different Russian thinkers who aren't as well known as in the West as, say, Tolstoy, or that seems to be a favorite in the West, whatever reason. And of course, Dostoevsky is well known, but his philosophy, the philosophy behind his thought, is not as well known. I'll also bring works to the table by Russian philosophers on Dostoevsky and his worldview and his sense of orthodoxy and Slavic nationalism, or relations between church and state, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of fun. And then we have Espionage History Archive, which you partner with me in, and there I cover translations and essays on espionage history, a lot of Cold War stuff. I translate from Russian primary source documents by KGB officers or from Soviet and Russian intelligence archives on different operations, different biographies of extraordinary Soviet intelligence officers, or even events going back to, say, the Great Game between Imperial Russia and Great Britain in Central Asia during the 19th century. So all that and more is covered at Espionage History Archive. So it's a fun project.
Yeah, no doubt, and a lot of fun writing that with you. Tell me, first of all, what gave you the idea to do Soul of the East?
Well, it was in early 2014. I started it right around the new year, and I just thought I wanted to make kind of a creative leap, and I was wondering what to do next. I hadn't written for a while, and so I thought to myself, well, if I can do translations, and writing for me is I do love writing, but I only get creative impulses every every now and then. So translation is more steady and routine, something I could do every week. So at least I could put out an article, or rather a translation, every week if I couldn't write an essay. And then, of course, you and other friends like Daniel Spalding joined me. And so we're able to have this team effort of putting up material at Soul of the East. But originally I was looking to really share the wealth of Russian, traditional Russian conservative and religious thought, so political and religious thinking, that really has not been available to the West overall, and in many ways still undiscovered. So one of the primary philosophers that I've focused on is Ivan Ilyin, because Ilyin was a white Russian emigre who was active in the anti-Bolshevik resistance and lived out his days in Europe, died in Switzerland in 1954. But Ilyin was a very articulate proponent of the traditional Russian monarchist position in the aftermath of the revolution, and where Russia needed to go from there. And Ilyin is also a favorite author of the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. So that as well should make him more significant and visible and necessary to understand for people who want to get a good handle on the nature of
contrast from Obama and Reverend Wright.
Yes, just a bit.
I don't know though. You put Ivan Ilyin in one side of the scale and Reverend Wright in the other side of the scale, and they're probably about.
It's a tough one.
It's a toss up there.
It's a close call there. Yeah, I'm trying to think of other who are the other big influences on Obama. I mean, just.
Well, we could go to the Bushes and look at somebody like Billy Graham or Jerry Falwell. They don't hold a candle to.
Yeah, I know, another set of geniuses right there.
No, but that actually does play into where we're going to go later with the Cold War, because evangelicalism will actually be utilized in the Cold War, and when it comes to the moral majority and the Liberty University, Bob Jones, faux evangelical right-wing establishment that would co-opt a lot of the, I guess, these sort of sectarian groups under the aegis of the neoconservative foreign policy establishment. So, and that's pretty much where they've all gone. And a lot of Hollywood actually would play into that, which is what we're going to get into. But so excellent. So thank you for those sites. And I would recommend listeners, again, go check out Mark's stuff. The translations are excellent. And we will get into the translations because those are real spy stories, many of which, as Mark said, have never been made available to English audiences. And when you read a lot of these at espionagehistoryarchive.com, they actually sound like Bond novels. They sound like plots of, even more, Le Carré's novels tend to be a little more subdued than Ian Fleming's, but, this is the kind of stuff that you're reading. You're reading real world stories from these KGB archives. So let me ask you just a different question. How do you go about seeking these out and finding these? Do you just come across, are you just Googling through some Russian archive site, or what's the means by which you come across these really neat stories that no one else sees?
Well, I do have a few of those sites, kind of archive style sites, on my bookmarks tab. But overall, I actually have a really good library of Russian books on intelligence and counterintelligence. So I have a lot of memoirs and a lot of official archives from the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service and of different time periods, as well as different directories and sort of structural directories of the Soviet intelligence services from 1917 to 1991 or post-Soviet and all those things. So a lot of it just comes from my own books that I've kind of built up over the years, and I'm just able to pull it out from my shelf and then translate it from there. Otherwise, I also access the internet, and there are some decent news sites out there. Also, sites for KGB veterans that have various articles and interviews. Those are also useful.
Do you get the impression that the dominance in the West on the part of the establishment media, that it's intentionally geared one way to where we don't ever get the? I mean, I feel like I know what your answer is going to be, but I want you to comment on this and sort of fill it out, where we don't get the other side.
Yes, I think there's definitely a slanted one-way story on how the Cold War is supposed to be, and how history, the direction of history, of course, and then when that manifests in these different given episodes of intelligence operations and espionage, of course you're going to hear the CIA or the MI6 influence narrative, sure, and so you're not getting the full story, and who knows if you're getting any part of the real story. And so what I try to do is at least provide the Russian side. Yeah. Sometimes there's no doubt that the Russians, of course, have admitted plenty, and or they might insert false narratives here and there to cover operational tracks of things that are still relevant and ongoing. That's pretty much a given. But nonetheless, I think there is actually, strangely, there's a lot more KGB officer memoirs and material about Soviet intelligence and counterintelligence available than there really is in the West about CIA and MI6. Mm-hmm. It seems that CIA and MI6 type memoirs and books on intelligence work from that perspective are a lot more controlled than what has come out about the KGB.
That's interesting.
So, yeah, it's ironic, but nonetheless, I think that is the case.
Well, we can see who's perhaps a little more tyrannical in that regard. But one of the questions that I get all the time is that people find it very hard to believe that there might be a relationship between these things to Hollywood. So we're going to take a brief break here, and we're going to come back with Mark Hackard. And we'll pick back up with this theme of Hollywood and the Cold War.
Hi, this is the Health Ranger here with the Health Minute, brought to you by store.talknetwork.com. The question today is, what is astaxanthin? Well, astaxanthin is an amazing nutritional supplement made by single-celled microorganisms. It is what turns salmon flesh pink and is believed to give them their incredible athletic ability to swim upstream and leap tall waterfalls to return to their spawning grounds. Astaxanthin is a fat-soluble carotenoid, which means it's a very high-powered, high-density antioxidant that's, in fact, hundreds of times more potent than vitamin C, gram per gram. And because it's fat-soluble, you want to take it with healthy oils, such as fish oils or nuts or seeds or other oils that you're getting in your diet. The oils will help transport astaxanthin to where it's needed in your body's cells. Try it yourself. Get it now at store.talknetwork.com.
All right, we're back with Mark Hackard. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer. And we're discussing Hollywood, Cold War, and Mark's translation work and article work at souloftheeast.org and espionagehistoryarchive.com. One of the questions I get asked often is, don't you think that you're exaggerating this relationship between the CIA, the Pentagon, and intelligence agencies in Hollywood? And I don't think so, because the more that I've researched this topic over the last several years, the more I see that actually confirms my exaggerated suspicions, I guess we might say. But one example of this is, for example, if we look at the 80s, we see a host of Cold War themed movies. And I'm going to list some of these here in a minute, but none of these, I would say 99%, right, 9 out of 10, present Eurasia or Russia or that area, that landmass, present their perspective in a good light. In other words, the 90% of these are, pro-CIA narratives. That's what I'm getting at. Now, if Hollywood was not intimately tied into the Pentagon and the CIA, then you would think that there would be, at least maybe some kind of balance here between perspectives in the Cold War, right?
And there never is.
Because
Right.
there's none, right? So,
Yeah.
so whether it's War Games or whether it's Red Dawn, whether it's Rambo, a lot of people don't think about Rambo in that regard, but it is.
Oh yeah.
You have other films like Rocky. In Rocky 4, right? It's Sylvester versus the Russian dude.
Yeah, Ivan Drago.
It's
Yep.
Ivan, right?
Yeah.
And so this even filters into ridiculous things like WWF wrestling, where there was what's that goofy? I can't think of the.
Is it Rusev or some goofy name?
Yeah, and then of course Hulk's supposed to be America, and he's
Yeah. Oh yeah. Superpower confrontation played out in the ring.
Yeah, so there was this string of movies, throughout the 80s, even Clint Eastwood films, Tom Clancy movies, even comedies like Spies Like Us, where the Cold War was the theme, and yet, none of these present the U.S. or the West in a critical light. The only oddity that I can think of is that there's a strange situation in Top Gun where whenever they're flying that jet and they come across who we think are supposed to be the Russians, they're actually they have no flag. so it's these guys flying a jet, and then when Tom Cruise flies his jet upside down, right?
Right.
The other team is not marked, and I was reading about that, and that for whatever reason, Reagan, during that period when he was actually ramping up money for recruitment films in Hollywood and for propaganda, there was a decision made to not want to offend the Russians in that film.
Interesting. I remember they had they were talking about the fictitious MiG-28, which of course doesn't exist. There's the MiG-27, which is a fighter bomber, and then of course the MiG-29, which is a multi-role fighter, which is a pretty good, is a kind of analogous to the F-16. It's a good jet, but they kept talking about the MiG-28 like it was some big super secret Soviet fighter, and I remember that the fighters in the Indian Ocean had red stars on them.
Yeah.
But there was some kind of fake Soviet client state, or I can't, that they put the red stars on the F-5 Tigers.
Yeah.
Make them look like MiGs. So yeah.
Now, Mark, I'm curious. Have you ever seen War Games?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
Right. Now, so this is interesting because it presents this AI supercomputer on nuke war scenario that accidentally goes down because Ferris Bueller hacks into Northcom or something. Right? He's accidentally setting off a nuclear war. Why do you think now this is 83? Now, if I recall, this is relatively close to the Wimpel story, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
If you would give us a little rundown on, you wrote a piece on this for EspionageHistoryArchive.com. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, what Jay is talking about is the fact that War Games, which came out in 83, is the same year that the NATO exercises Able Archer took place, Able Archer 83, which took place in November of 83, and they envisioned an intercontinental nuclear war between NATO and the Soviet Union. And there were command staff exercises, so there weren't a lot of actual operational elements involved, but the Soviets were on hair trigger at the time because they were very paranoid by U.S. moves, as well as Reagan's rhetoric. In March of 83, he had given the famous Evil Empire speech. Interestingly, I believe it was March 8th, 1983, and then November, I think it was in November of 83 that he decided to, or rather that NATO had Able Archer, and thankfully Reagan did not participate in Able Archer because that might have triggered a Soviet response. And part of that response was a special unit, a KGB Special Forces unit called Wimpel. Wimpel means pennant or banner. And WIMPL was formed in 1981 by Yuri Andropov when he was the head of the KGB before he became the general secretary. And WIMPL was a super secret elite Spetsnaz, which means special forces in Russian, unit charged with carrying out special operations, assassinations, sabotage, and other various high-risk missions overseas in basically deep reconnaissance in enemy territory for the purpose of strategic decapitation. So if, say, Able Archer in 1983, thank God it didn't, but say it triggered a Soviet response, the tip of the spear, the tip of the Soviet spear, would have been these special forces teams like WIMPL and also from the GRU, which is Soviet military intelligence, who would have gone in and assassinated major figures in Reagan's cabinet, Reagan himself, as well as the Joint Chiefs of Staff, major industrialists like Rockefeller, and also taken out the power grid and all those things, sabotaged energy pipelines. All that was targeted. So it is interesting that War Games, which I'm sure had some input from Rand Corporation,
it had to be right
in the same year that Able Archer did as well, which was also covered, at least retrospectively, heavily covered by Rand. So it's pretty harrowing, and I'm glad we made it through that.
Yeah, well, and the plot is all about game theory, because that's essentially what Matthew Broderick is doing. His character is he plays games, and so when he hacks into the AI computer, he inadvertently sets off this AI back and forth wargaming scenario that the supercomputers engaged in, and that is actually what Rand was involved in back even prior to the early 80s with people like Herman Kahn and the Doomsday Machine, and this they would also implement the game theory of John Nash, the famous mathematician who, well, essentially kind of gave us game theory, at least in terms of the more prevalent breakthroughs, and who is, of course, the subject of the film A Beautiful Mind. So, do you think, just out in your opinion, do you think that the artificial intelligence that we see going on in that film, which obviously it's exaggerated, do you ever get the impression that Russia worked on artificial intelligence as well, or is this just really a Western military-industrial complex thing?
I would make a bet that the Soviets were working on some variant of artificial intelligence, and that they were likely in that area one step behind the West. The United States has always been at the top of the field in that respect, but their Soviet intelligence and their KGB's Line X is what it was called, was for technical intelligence collection, or rather industrial espionage, technical intelligence, getting a hold of technological secrets. Line X was very good at ferreting out all those details from various countries, from Japan to Western Europe to the United States to everywhere in between. And one of their target would most certainly have been artificial intelligence and all the latest developments in computer technology and jumps in computing, things of that nature.
Yeah, and as we've mentioned in the past, I've told you about the season 2 of The Americans, the Fox series that deals with the illegals, which we'll get into that here in a little bit. But in season 2 of the illegals, they're really focused on stealing the information that surrounds the ARPANET back in 1983.
That's very close to reality.
That's what I was going to ask you. We're going to have a break here in a sec. And again, you're listening to Esoteric Hollywood, and I'm your host, Jay Dyer of jaysanalysis.com. And we're speaking with Mark Hackard, and we are always, as usual, on talknetwork.com. Check out talknetwork.com for all of your supplement and organic needs. So we're going to be back here in a few minutes. Stay where you are.
Welcome to the Captain Obvious Health Minute. I'm Captain Obvious. A listener asks, how can she improve her sex life? The answer, dear, is have more sex. Nailed it. Another listener asks, how can I lose weight? I've tried everything. The answer, my friend, is have you tried eating fewer calories? Nailed it again. Another listener asks, my right foot experiences pain when I put weight on it. Well, don't put weight on it then. I'm on a roll. Somebody bill Medicaid. And finally, a listener wants to know, how do I stop my head from hurting so badly? Well, stop banging it against the wall. This is Captain Obvious, and if you're looking for an obviously superior source of superfoods, check out store.talknetwork.com. Until next time!
Gold and silver have stood the test of time as a reliable and safe store of value for personal wealth and protection. Precious metals are an excellent way to hedge against risky markets and uncertain times, and also provides a low-profile asset for enhanced financial privacy. IDP Consulting Group specializes in pure bullion products for physical delivery and commercial storage of gold and silver products for security and peace of mind. As an asset class, precious metals can never go to zero and have the potential to reward smart investors as global markets increasingly threaten conventional investment strategies. You can call IDP Consulting Group to learn more at 855-860-6800 or visit their website at idpconsultinggroup.com. Payment terms are easy and simple, and IDP promptly and discreetly ships all orders within the continental U.S. So call 855-860-6800. That's 855-860-6800 and put a gold and silver lining in your portfolio today.
All right, we're back with Mark Hackard of souloftheeast.org. This is Jay Dyer of jaysanalysis.com. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. We're talking War Games, the goofy, silly 1983 film that starred Ferris Bueller. It's not really Ferris Bueller, but you know, it's Matthew Broderick. So
Simba from The Lion King.
Right. And Dabney Coleman from a whole host of 80s TV shows. But who's running the Pentagon or running a NORAD or whatever. Another thing, but I have to say, though, one of the things that's really ridiculous about this movie is there's no way you would ever hook up your nukes to an AI game system. Like hooking your nukes up to your Xbox. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, who would do that? But anyway, I guess it makes for a silly movie. But so
Joshua, I think, yeah, you don't hook up Joshua to your nukes. That was the name of the computer. Yeah,
it's okay. You can hook it up to your Atari, right? But
yeah,
but there's a whole bunch of these movies like this. There was Red Dawn, and if you think about Red Dawn, how ridiculous it is. And I've mentioned this too in other talks, is that there's no way you can stage a land invasion of the United States. It's just completely ridiculous.
Right.
And this whole movie is premised on the idea that, you know, the re-education camps are going to be set up. It's almost like this movie was kind of played into the patriotard narrative of, you know, the Tea Party type mindset.
Absolutely. There were even books that mirrored Red Dawn and the silly re-education camps that they showed in the movie, which were just retarded looking, and they had the town. They had awful Russian translators in that movie as well, because I remember there was in the town in Colorado, there was one place set up to be the Soviet American Friendship House, and they couldn't even get the grammar right on that in Russian. I mean, it was just ridiculous, you know. But there were books written in the 80s by these neocon think tank hacks about what to do if the Russians come, and so on and so forth. So
like a survival manual for the invasion.
How the Soviets were going to set up re-education camps and so on.
Here's how you barter with vodka when you're in the camp.
Right. They love sardines and vodka. And, yeah.
A cigarette's worth how much?
Yeah. Stock up your Marlboros to bribe them. It was really silly.
That's actually what happens in Red Dawn, though. It really is that bad. But
right.
But the irony of that is that how ridiculous is it to be afraid of re-education camps by some mythical foreign invasion force when the re-education camp is what you go to when you send your kids to the public school and they learn how to have sex when they're like 8.
That's exactly the point.
Yeah, that's the re-education camp.
Right. It's here, and it's not the Soviets.
Exactly.
It's wearing red and white striped pants and a big top hat with blue field and white stars.
It's Uncle Sam mixed with Liberace.
Yeah, Uncle Liberace.
Uncle Liberace wearing a sequined flag cape.
Yeah.
Playing the stars and bars on a big grand piano. So, let's see. So, let's talk about some more pieces that you've done. So quite a few stick out to me that I really enjoyed over the past couple of years. You did a piece, I know you've talked about this, but I think it'll be good for this audience, a lot of whom will have not read it and may not be familiar with it, but one of your more standout pieces is Philby and the Betrayal of the West. Give us just kind of a rundown of this and who Kim Philby was and why he matters. And then I'd like to talk about how there's another kind of Kim that we can speak of, a novel Kim, that reminds me of another piece that you did about Tibet. So tell us first about Philby and the Betrayal of the West.
Sure. Philby and the Betrayal of the West was a piece I wrote earlier this year, and it's based on it's a review of a book that I read by Ben McIntyre, who's a journalist, and he's written various he's a British journalist and written various works on British intelligence and counterintelligence. So his latest book is called The Great Betrayal, and it's about Philby, or A Spy Among Friends, and then it's subtitled Philby and the Great Betrayal or something like that. And it's a well-written book, and it's pretty in-depth. It goes into Philby and his various situations and how he became a Soviet agent and so on, and it also covers well his upbringing, what his class environment, things of that nature. Gives us a good feel for what Philby's world was like. And so Philby and the Betrayal in the West, the article that I wrote, is kind of a reflection on that work and on Philby as this traitor figure, when in reality Philby was really only following logical steps of Western philosophy, of
liberal democracy,
exactly, of liberal democracy, of the ideals put forward by liberal democracy. He was only enacting those ideals to a more logical extreme and bringing them to fruition. So he saw, of course, proletarian class struggle as the future, as the way to a better, more just society, and so on. Because what he saw around him was already emptied out by nihilism. One of his good friends, a colleague in MI6, described it as that he was serving king, country, class, and club. Those four things. Think about those four things: king, country, class, and club. So king doesn't really mean anything anymore, because Britain is sort of this constitutional monarchy / liberal democracy, but really an oligarchy /
bankerocracy, right?
Right, exactly. Where the royal family is really only one segment of the oligarchy that's a financial elite, and then you of course have country, which is maybe propagated for purposes of nationalism during times of war, but that ultimately is meaningless, because the country is ruled by hardcore internationalists who are looking to set up a global system. Then you have class and you have club. Well, those are self-explanatory, and they shouldn't I don't see how those could really bring much devotion, because at the very beginning, God was thrown out of all of this, and there's no notion of sacral monarchy, of power deriving from the transcendent, of higher ideals. Everything is grounded in empiricism and liberalism, and ultimately collapses into nihilism and narcissism. So Philby was simply responding to the great questions of his time as he saw them, with what was the most progressive way of thinking, and that of course in the earlier 20th century was Marxism. So he was really a creature of his environment in then modern Britain.
Yeah, the classical liberalism of Locke, you point out, is really what gives birth down the road to this empty formalism of the British establishment that leaves a person with nothing transcendent to look to for a foundation or for some sort of meaning in the civil society in which they subsist. And I think it's interesting that you point out that Philby's father was largely absent, St. John Philby.
Yes.
And so, in other words, an absent father figure, sort of corresponding in a way, I guess you could say, to the absent father figure of God in this liberal society.
That's exactly right, and that's the only thing that makes a true monarchy a monarchy. And really, with Philby's father, he was a colonial administrator in the Punjab, where Philby was born, and so Philby was very much a child of the empire. But as you say, that was essentially a fatherless empire. There was no long ago. There was no more sacral understanding of power and of authority, which would then merit responsibility on their part of the ruler to the subject, that would infuse this ideal with Christian ethics. Rather, you have people like Darwin and Malthus and Locke and Hume and all the empiricists and utilitarians who fashion society, British society, into this predatory oligarchy.
And the unifying factor amongst all of those people that you listed is pragmatism and a complete divorce, a complete leaving aside of any notion of higher ideals or idealism. I'm not speaking of idealism in a philosophical sense of metaphysics. I'm just saying anything transcendent, anything beyond the here and the now. Because all those thinkers that you've listed are pragmatists. And right. Empiricism is ultimately pragmatic. And so it's interesting that Philby's dad, Harry St. John Philby, is, as far as I can tell, basically being this sort of emissary, legate, spy on the part of the Brits to, go off and carve up what would become Saudi Arabia. Right. And so the British Empire is ultimately a pragmatic empire. It's an empire based around power for the sake of power. And ultimately, I would say that's ultimately satanic. And so if you would, tell us how this ties into talks that you've given in the past that I thought were very enlightening about Alfred Mackinder and the heartland theory versus like the maritime power. What are these two ideas here?
Right. Well, as you were saying, the British Empire would represent this ultra materialistic, but on a deeper level, I would have to say, I would have to agree with you that there's something even darker there spiritually. But the British Empire would represent the maritime power, thalassocracy, thalassa being sea in Greek, so the seagoing state, versus the land power, the telluric power. Traditionally, Russia, Germany can also play that role. And so the struggle between land power and sea power was well elaborated by Halford Mackinder, a Royal Geographical Society representative he was an academic. In 1904, he gave a speech to the Royal Geographical Society outlining the heartland, the Eurasian heartland, which is roughly contiguous with Russia as the geographical pivot of history.
Hold that thought, Mark, on Eurasia, and we're going to take a brief break here, and we'll come right back.
Welcome to the Health Minute. I'm Mike Adams, the Health Ranger, with my sidekick Tonto, not far behind. The topic today is, what about heavy metals in superfoods and nutritional supplements and even certified organic products that are coming from China? Well, you may not be aware of this yet, but the Talk Network online store, which you'll find at store.talknetwork.com, uses our own private laboratory, where I'm the lab science director, and we test everything that we sell for toxic heavy metals, such as lead, cadmium, arsenic, mercury, and even elements with radioactive isotopes, such as uranium, strontium, and cesium. And if it doesn't show up as really, really clean, we reject it. And yes, we test this with university-level equipment, ICP-MS instrumentation, sensitive down to parts per billion concentrations. So if you want really clean foods, superfoods, and nutritional supplements that are laboratory validated, get them now at store.talknetwork.com.
All right, we're back with Mark Hackard of SoulofTheEast.org and EspionageHistoryArchive.com. I'm your host, Jay Dyer, as always, and you're listening to TalkNetwork.com. This is Esoteric Hollywood. Mark, you were speaking about the heartland theory analysis of geopolitical strategy, and you were getting into the maritime power versus the land power. The land power, of course, being Russia and perhaps Germany. The sea power being the Atlanticist powers of what would be the British Empire, and then later, of course, the Anglo-American establishment, including the U.S. So, Phil, go ahead and fill us out with that thought you were expanding on.
Sure. That I was basically just talking about how Mackinder outlined this theory of Eurasia, the Eurasian heartland, as the pivot of world history. You can go back to, say, the Mongol conquests. Even further back, you can go to the great migration of peoples that would ultimately bring down the Roman Empire and so on, to show that really the pulses of energy that shaped history came from the Eurasian heartland, and that the Eurasian heartland and whoever controlled it would have the launch pad for a truly global world empire. And so Mackinder, being a strategist, said that whoever would control the gateway to the heartland, Eastern Europe, could control the heartland, and whoever controlled the heartland could control Eurasia, and whoever can control Eurasia could control the world. And this has been modified and reformulated by various geopoliticians like Nicholas Spikeman and Colin Gray and other more recent Western geostrategists, but the main principle remains the same, and really the goal of United States strategy, as well as, of course, British strategy going back to the Great Game against Russia in the 19th century, but has been to quote unquote contain Russia, but the underlying objective there is to ultimately gain control of the heartland and found the first truly unified world empire, the world state, which is, of course, the dream of people like H.G. Wells and Huxley. And
that's why this is relevant, because...
That's why it's relevant.
Yeah, I'm sure most listeners will be, in some sense, aware of the New World Order, the world government. Well, this is how we got there. So what Mark's telling you is background to what has brought us to this point, and the actual powers that are behind this that would like to see this technocratic world state brought into play.
Right. This is the practical geopolitics of the Novus Ordo Seclorum,
yes,
as upheld by the modern West. So that the conquest of Eurasia is the goal of these predatory elites.
And I think it's important to understand that it's classical liberalism has within itself the imperative to crush something like Russia or any other state that might be something that stands in the way of the centuries-old imperative of classical liberalism. And in other words, classical liberalism is what undergirds the Novus Ordo Seclorum.
Absolutely.
It's not some sort of theocracy of, right-wingers that want to take over the world. It's not neoconservatism is not conservatism. Neoconservatism is classical liberal ideology.
Exactly right. And classical liberal ideology allows for no competitors in the same way that Marxism or National Socialism or any other extreme ideology. It's also at its root, it's totalitarian.
It's totalitarian relativism at its root, and that's the point. Yeah, and that's why the British thinkers and the empiricists and they're pragmatists, right? Relativism leads to pragmatism, because if there's no right or wrong, no truth or falsehood, nothing certain, then might makes right, and if might makes right, then all actions are then dictated by what's pragmatic, whatever your ends or means happen to be. They could be positive or negative for you. It's all, in other words, everything's subjective, and then it just becomes total chaos, right?
Yeah.
So it's very nihilistic, and Mark is great in his articles at pointing out how this philosophy leads to those conclusions, right? So that's sort of the end game that we get to. Even if, if we were to go back in a time machine and talk to John Locke, which of course sounds like a nightmare to me, it would be very boring. But if we were to do that, certainly John Locke would not say, I'm not a nihilist. I don't believe in atheism. I don't believe in, what. But it's rather that the presuppositions, the assumptions, the starting point of that philosophy over time, sometimes even over a few centuries, is what gives birth to something hideous, right? It gives birth.
Exactly. It takes time. It can take generations for the potentialities of a certain idea to manifest, but ideas have consequences. Mm-hmm. So, and we see the liberal idea in full flower right now in our own modern West.
One of the films I'd like to tie this back into is, have you ever seen a film called The Man Who Would Be King?
I've only seen parts of it. Right. It is a classic piece with Sean Connery, right, where he's and Michael Caine, and they're British officers.
Now, right, and now this is the reason
they're Masons.
Exactly. That's the reason I bring it up, is because if we want to get to where the origin of the liberal democracy comes from, then we look to the history of the Western revolutionary movements in Europe, that, as well as the American Revolution, many of which were influenced by and prompted by Masonic lodges. And that is a Rudyard Kipling story. And Kipling is actually describing a kind of bizarre ideology that entranced a lot of British thinkers in the 18th and 19th century, the sort of weird fascination with Tibet. So we were talking a minute ago about Kim Philby, but have you read the novel Kim by chance?
You know what? I have not yet read the novel.
Now, it's interesting because it gets all into the Great Game, and it gets into Tibetan lamas, and Kim befriends Tibetan lamas, and he kind of has these run-ins with Russian intelligence agents. And this is taking place in late 19th century, so it's during that Great Game period. But it reminded me, when I was reading your excellent piece on the Great Game in Tibet, the first thing I thought of was the story of Kim and the story of The Man Who Would Be King, because in the film, Connery and his buddy cohort, Michael Caine, they go and they end up in the Tibetan mountains, and they end up they're in the Himalayas, and they find this tribe hidden away. And what they do is that they present themselves as the fulfillment of a prophecy of the return of Alexander the Great. And so Sean Connery starts acting like he's Alexander the Great, sort of reborn from the dead.
Yeah.
And he's this fake savior to these people. They're God man. And we get the idea that he got this idea this con man idea from his Masonic philosophy. So tell us about your piece, The Great Game in Tibet, because it's very, very curiously parallels these two stories.
Yeah, that's interesting, just because Masonic philosophy is at the spiritual level such a con. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so it as we know, with Albert Pike directly saying it, that lower level Masons aren't going to know the real truth of what happens at the upper level. So it is in the very real sense a scam.
Yeah, this is going to get into the Tsar, and as from what I understand, the removal of Tsar Nicholas was very much connected to different Masonic and occultic groups.
Yes, there were those themes running in the actual murder of the Tsar at the Ipatiev house in Yekaterinburg. So yeah. But long before that, so that back in 1904, Tsar Nicholas, when he was still ruling and presiding over a strong Russia, although there was about to be disaster in the Far East with the Russo-Japanese War, he sent a mission to Tibet, a secret mission, an intelligence reconnaissance group to Tibet to basically take stock of the political situation, see what British positions were there, because Tibet at the time was a bone of contention between Britain and Russia. Mm-hmm. It was sort of a no man's land between India and Russian holdings in Central Asia. Now, Tibet formally still belonged to China, but China was too weak to really do anything about it. So Tibet had this, a pretty wide degree of autonomy, but it was too weak to defend itself. And so the British made incursions into Tibet and set up their own sort of puppet rulers and so on, or commissioned different lamas to do their bidding. So Tsar Nicholas sent a party of Cossacks down to Tibet, but they were it was very much a clandestine mission. The Cossacks were not just regular Russian Cossacks, but they were Kalmyks, and Kalmyks are a Buddhist people, a Buddhist people related to the Mongols who live on the Russian steppes. And so he sent these Kalmyk Cossacks who underwent intelligence training and were armed properly and equipped for the mission. He sent them on this journey through Central Asia.
Mark, hold that thought with the Cossacks. We're going to be right back after a quick break.
The Dan Dix Show.
Open up your mind, your heart, and your soul, and seek truth with an unbiased approach, because those who truly seek it will find it. And the truth, my friends, will set you free.
The Dan Dix Show, Mondays at 3 p.m. Eastern on TalkNetwork.com.
Hi, this is Mike Adams, the Health Ranger, the co-founder of TalkNetwork.com, with a question and answer segment from our online store that you'll find at store.talknetwork.com. The question today is, what's the difference between chlorella and spirulina? Well, both are single-celled microalgae superfoods that are very rich in chlorophyll. But spirulina is much higher in iron, so it tends to be used by women who need to replenish their iron stores. Chlorella, on the other hand, is useful to both men and women because it's loaded with chlorophyll. It has chlorella growth factor in it, CGF, and it also contains enzymes, vitamins, and minerals, all in their plant-based form, their bioavailable form that your body can easily assimilate. It's much better than synthetic vitamins, and chlorella is a complete protein. Find them both at store.talknetwork.com.
The new media mothership has landed. Beginning transmission now. This is talknetwork.com.
The Dan Dix Show.
Open up your mind, your heart, and your soul, and seek truth with an unbiased approach, because those who truly seek it will find it. And the truth, my friends, will set you free.
The Dan Dix Show, Mondays at 3 p.m. Eastern on talknetwork.com.
This is talknetwork.com.
For Talk Network News, I'm Don Naylor. White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest says the U.S. hopes Canada will continue to be a part of the anti-Islamic State group coalition, despite what Trudeau said on the campaign trail about withdrawing Canada warplanes from the fight.
They've made an important contribution thus far, and we're obviously deeply appreciative of them lending their talent and skill and expertise to that effort. And we hope that we can continue to count on their ongoing support for this very important mission.
Vice President Joe Biden says he won't be a candidate in the coming campaign, but if Democrats are smart, they'll embrace the legacy that he and President Obama have built.
Democrats should not only defend this record and protect this record, they should run on the record.
House Speaker John Boehner says he expects Paul Ryan will get the necessary backing to become Speaker.
He works hard, he's very bright, and he has good relationships, I think, with all the wings of the party. So that's why I think he'll be doing fine.
British Prime Minister David Cameron confirms that a British company has reached an agreement with a Chinese corporation to build a nuclear power plant at Hinkley Point in West England.
I'm pleased to announce today that we're signing an historic deal to build the Hinkley nuclear power station, providing reliable, affordable energy for nearly 6 million homes and creating more than 25,000 jobs, all the while working together to build a low-carbon future.
And NYPD Commissioner William Bratton says a New York City police officer died after being shot in the head while pursuing a suspect.
I got to inform you that New York City police officer Randolph Holder, 33 years of age, badge number 13340, a 5-year veteran of the New York City Police Department, was killed in the line of duty, murdered.
For details on these stories and more, go to talknetwork.com.
Gold and silver have stood the test of time as a reliable and safe store of value for personal wealth and protection. Precious metals are an excellent way to hedge against risky markets and uncertain times, and also provide a low-profile asset for enhanced financial privacy. IDP Consulting Group specializes in pure bullion products for physical delivery or commercial storage of gold and silver products for security and peace of mind. As an asset class, precious metals can never go to zero and have the potential to reward smart investors as global markets increasingly threaten conventional investment strategies. You can call IDP Consulting Group to learn more at 855-860-6800 or visit their website at www.idpconsultinggroup.com. Payment terms are easy and simple, and IDP promptly and discreetly ships all orders within the continental U.S. So call 855-860-6800. That's 855-860-6800 and put a gold and silver lining in your portfolio today.
You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer. I'm speaking with Mark Hackard of souloftheeast.org and espionagehistoryarchive.com. We were just talking about Tibet and the Great Game and the Kazakhs. Go ahead with where you were, Mark.
Yeah, so in 1904, because of geopolitical tensions over areas in between the Russian Empire in Central Asia and the British Empire in India, one of those was Tibet. Tsar Nicholas sent down a clandestine intelligence gathering mission to Tibet to monitor the situation and see how the political environment there was unfolding. and he sent Kalmyk Cossacks, and Kalmyks are a Buddhist people related to the Mongols, and they're of course the Kalmyks are still in Russia, and they still live there, and they still have their Buddhist temples on the steppes. And so they went through Chinese Turkestan and connected with the Russian mission there in the city of Kolja, and then they made their way on to Tibet and got to Lhasa, but unfortunately the main officer in charge died of a mysterious disease, and I'm sure there are suspicions on whether the British poisoned him, but his assistant, who was an actual chaplain, a Buddhist chaplain in the Kalmyk Cossack group, took over his duties and posed as a lama, because he was a Buddhist cleric, but he posed as a major lama and was able to win the trust and respect of the lamas in Lhasa, in the Tibetan capital, and gain entry to various influential circles and learn really what British policy aims were, what they were up to, who was reliable, who was not, who was working for the British. They were tailed by Nepalese agents of British intelligence during some of their time there, and then they made a successful mission, and then they made their way back to the Tsar and finally reached him in 1906. So it's a fascinating account of how the Great Game really was played in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and the use of religious cover for these operations.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really cool story, so you can check it out at Espionage History Archive.
Now, it reminds me of another one that you did around the same time period, where when I think about the Bond story, You Only Live Twice, which is the 1967 film, the fifth film incarnation of the series, which actually the screenplay was written by Roald Dahl, who was also British intelligence.
Yes, he was, yeah.
And so Dahl wrote the screenplay for it, but in that narrative, and this is going to bring me to the next piece that I want to discuss with you, it's Bond in Japan, and he's dealing with China, and China's being extorted. So an interesting Far Eastern interplay with Bond there, and there's a situation where we get the impression that he's mind controlled, and in the novel, Bond actually kind of undergoes this process where has an alternate identity, and he comes back and he kind of doesn't know who he is for a while. So there's a body double kind of replacement theme there. I'm not saying Bond is replaced, but his mind is replaced.
Right.
And campy and silly to be sure, but it reminds me of the story that you covered, Moscow's Master Spy in Japan, which I thought was just amazing. Tell us about Ituro Koruba, I believe was his name, and that story, because this really reads like a Bond novel.
Yeah. Moscow's Master Spy in Japan is a fascinating story, and it reached news outlets, Japanese news outlets, only in 2008. Is when the story was finally made public. What happened was, we'll start from the beginning. In the Japanese security services revealed this story, the details of it. In 1965, a resident of the northern Japanese island of Hokkaido went missing, and all of a sudden, and his name was Ituro Kuroba. So Ituro Kuroba disappeared under mysterious circumstances. And then another Ituro Kuroba showed up on Hokkaido, but it wasn't the same one. This was actually a body double. And he made his way to Tokyo and would live in Tokyo. And so Ichiro Kuroba for 30 years ran a successful successful network of spies in Japan, collecting strategic, political, and military intelligence. Now, Kuroba was in reality, of course, not Kuroba. He was a double. Because he was a Soviet illegal officer. An illegal is a deep cover officer who infiltrates a foreign country under another national identity, either the identity of the target country or a third country. So this Soviet illegal, we don't know who he was, but he was obviously a Soviet citizen of some Asian extraction who underwent intensive language and intelligence training and was able to assume the identity of a Japanese man, which is pretty amazing. That's what illegals do. Typically, illegals will often assume identities of Americans or Germans or Brits and so on, but they can also assume Japanese identities or a lot of times in the Cold War, and I'm sure this is still true today, Armenians are often used by Soviet and Russian intelligence because Armenians have such a wide diaspora and they're all over the place.
Yes, in fact, just real quick to interrupt here, it made me think of, are you familiar with the Armenian film Garden of Pomegranates?
No.
Yeah, that was actually made by a Soviet filmmaker. It's a very, very sort of avant-garde, bizarre film that's sort of a cult classic in the vein of perhaps Jodorowsky, or it's kind of like El Topo or maybe The Devils of Loudon. But he's an example of a filmmaker who was actually working with the Soviets, who was Armenian. But go ahead.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. And Armenians were very very widespread across the Middle East and into Europe. So they were a great source of intelligence. The Armenian diaspora and Soviet illegals who were of Armenian ethnicity were able to blend in very well in those environments. But back to Ichiro Kuroba in Japan.
By the way, I think it's Color of Pomegranates. Color of Pomegranates is the name of the film. I got that wrong. So.
Oh, that's fine.
Pardon me there. And it's the 1969 Armenian film, and Parajanov is the director. Excuse me.
Interesting. Okay. So going back to Ichiro Kuroba in Japan. So the second iteration of Ichiro Kuroba shows up in Japan in 1965, moves to Tokyo, and for 30 years runs a successful illegal, what the KGB would call a residency, a network under his command. And then in 1995 he disappeared, and there are indications that he was aware there was some kind of danger approaching, that he may have fallen into the field of vision of Japanese counterintelligence, public security intelligence agency. And so he just picked up and left. And apparently there were still some cipher pads and a radio left behind in his home, so it might have been a very quick exit. But he managed for almost 30 years to work in Tokyo as a Japanese citizen, as a full-blooded Japanese man, even though he wasn't that, and steal valuable Japanese secrets running this agent network there. And so it's a pretty fascinating story, and it shows the really incredible training and dedication and willpower and skill of this KGB Directorate S, the illegals.
Yes.
What they do.
That's where I'd like to go next, is to get into Director S and the illegals. And so if you're listening to this and you're a fan of television and you've watched spy shows, then as we mentioned earlier, there's the popular series The Americans, of which I've seen the first 2 seasons of. Very well made, actually consulted by CIA people directly. It presents if you read Mark's pieces, what I found was that this show actually presents quite a few scenarios that really match up to Mark's translations at espionagehistoryarchive.com. So plenty of scenarios. We mentioned earlier the case of what appeared to be a nuclear threat and so forth. But so, Mark, tell us about Directorate S. Tell us about the illegals. We've got a minute and a half here. We're going to take a break. But get into why this is so spectacular on the part of the Russians and their intelligence work with what they can do with Directorate S.
Sure. Well, Directorate S was the super secret elite structure within the KGB's first chief directorate, which carried out foreign intelligence. And Directorate S was responsible for infiltrating deep cover officers into foreign countries to run intelligence networks outside of diplomatic purview. So they had no diplomatic cover. They were unprotected. Mm-hmm. In the U.S. CIA parlance, that's known as NOC, non-official cover. And typically CIA knockoff officers will be placed within American corporations or things like that. But the KGB Directorate S was a whole different level because they took on completely foreign identities and posed as foreign citizens. And so a Russian would, in effect, a Russian could become an American or a German or an Italian and so on. And it was pretty amazing.
Right. Let's take a brief break here. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about the illegals with Mark Hackard.
Hi, this is the Health Ranger here with the Health Minute brought to you by store.talknetwork.com. The question today is, what is astaxanthin? Well, astaxanthin is an amazing nutritional supplement made by single-celled microorganisms. It is what turns salmon flesh pink and is believed to give them their incredible athletic ability to swim upstream and leap tall waterfalls to return to their spawning grounds. Astaxanthin is a fat-soluble carotenoid, which means it's a very high-powered, high-density antioxidant that's, in fact, hundreds of times more potent than vitamin C, gram per gram. And because it's fat-soluble, you want to take it with healthy oils, such as fish oils or nuts or seeds or other oils that you're getting in your diet. The oils will help transport astaxanthin to where it's needed in your body's cells. Try it yourself. Get it now at store.talknetwork.com.
All right, we're back. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer. We're talking to Mark Hackard about Directorate S and the illegals. And if you watch the popular series with Fox, The Americans, then you're looking at an example of the illegals, a very relatively accurate presentation in terms of what we don't generally see from Hollywood. But Mark was actually giving us the background to the real story of the illegals and their tremendous theatrical skills and training that they underwent in order to play these roles. Now, let me play just skeptic here, Mark, and ask a question.
Sure.
So if I'm hearing this and you're talking about, okay, so the CIA people might want to use corporations as a cover or something like that to go, do foreign work. Why would the illegals want to be citizens?
Well, they might very well be working in corporations, but it would be under the cover of as undercover as foreign citizens. KGB certainly inserted its illegal officers into Western corporations as well as into Western military establishments and intelligence. You have the case of KGB illegals even undergoing special forces training in U.S. special warfare units, allegedly the SEALs, and then bringing that knowledge back to Directorate S to form in 1981 the commando unit Voinpo, as we talked about, which was also under Directorate S. They certainly weren't averse to working under all sorts of covers, but rather they weren't going to have any connection to the Soviet Union or as little connection to Eastern Europe as possible. Sometimes illegals might, under their legend, which was their deep cover,
right,
might have had they would make it, say, Polish descent or something like that if they had an accent in a certain language to explain it.
So would there be like an expiration period where they would be extracted after this, or how would they pass the information? Would it be a traditional drop scenario, or how might this go?
It just depended. Oftentimes, they would communicate with Moscow Center by radio, or in different burst transmitters. And as technology developed into the 70s and 80s, it got more sophisticated.
And this would be with what we'd see like the number stations.
Exactly.
And this is what we actually see in The Americans. There are several scenes where Kerry Russell's character gets up early in the morning and she listens to these broadcasts with these strange numbers being listed, and they're on a certain station and the frequency on the radio that she has.
And that was used for communication. That's right. And as well, they would also control from the embassies of the illegals was pretty limited. Control was mostly exerted from Moscow Center. The embassy role, so the official, the KGB residency under diplomatic cover, did more of a facilitate a role. They played a role of facilitating these operations. So within the KGB residency, you would have different lines. So like line X would be technological espionage, industrial espionage. Line P would be political intelligence, political military intelligence. Line K was counterintelligence. Line N was for the illegals. And so line N would work for various purposes of supplying documents or getting necessary paperwork or gathering other information for legends or facilitating travel for these illegal officers. But they didn't really know a lot about, they weren't supposed to, it was very compartmentalized is what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, the way it's presented in the show, for example, is that the husband and wife team do not have a direct interaction with the embassy.
Yeah, and that would be typically the case.
Yeah, yes. So they actually report to their handler, who reports directly to Moscow.
Right.
Yeah, and so the embassy really is just there to facilitate diplomatic type stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and you know the system of communications with an embassy, with a KGB residency in the embassy would typically be used infrequently and with dead drops usually.
Right. That's
keeping personal meetings to a minimum. Interestingly, contact with an embassy with the Soviet embassy would be in an emergency. Overall, there was a case in the 70s where a pair of illegals and their two children, they went under the name Miscones, and they were captured in Argentina. I think it was because of the British agent within the KGB, Oleg Gordievsky, who would go on. He defected in 1985. He wrote a book, and so on. But and he's famous in Britain as this. I'm sure he still writes for the British press or whatever. Mm-hmm. But Gordievsky gave away these illegals, and there were two husband and wife pair living in Argentina, and he tipped off British intelligence, which of course told the CIA, and so the CIA flew them to Washington, D.C., and or rather they were housing them in a safe house outside of Washington, D.C., trying to interrogate them. And the family of illegals was able to escape and took a cab directly to the gates of the Soviet embassy in D.C. and actually made it out. So that was a pretty harrowing or pretty intense story. Maybe I'll translate that sometime. But it just shows
that's very similar to actually incidents in the television show.
Yeah, I've still got to watch it. So you're just going to have to match up what you've seen from the show, and I'll try and give you the corresponding history. Yeah.
I'm not expecting. I'm just making conversation. And, and let you know that so many of these things do seem to be based in real events, as far as we can tell. Now, there's another piece you did I'd like to move to. Do you have anything else you'd like to point out about the illegals? Because it's really fascinating scenario.
Oh, I recommend people that can go to the section on illegals at Espionage History Archive, and it's all there. And it ties in with special operations and Wimpel and Spetsnaz and they all run together ultimately. So it's a pretty fascinating history.
If we rewind a bit and we go back to World War II, there's a fascinating story that you dealt with. Well, actually, it was Nina, but you also touched on a similar situation. Tell us about Operation Scorpion, and there's plenty of films, obviously, that deal with World War II and Nazis and all that, but describe Operation Scorpion and why is this one so neat?
Yeah, Operation Scorpion is sort of it was a Soviet KGB operation rooted in the legacy of World War II, if you could put it that way. Mm-hmm. And it was also another operation run by the Illegals Directorate. Operation Scorpion was centered around the creation of a false Nazi international organization run by former Wehrmacht and SS officers based in South America. And so the KGB Directorate S under a man, an officer named Yuri Drozdov, he's still alive. I think he's 90 or 95, and he's a legend within the KGB or Russian intelligence to this day. But Drozdov, this was around the 1960s, 1970s. Drozdov founded this fake Nazi organization and posed because he was a fluent German.
You mean it wasn't the FBI?
Yeah, no, this one wasn't the FBI. Yeah, this one is right. This one was the KGB. So Drozdov founded this fake Nazi international and used it to penetrate the BND, German intelligence. And with this goal in mind, he even masqueraded as a former Wehrmacht officer named Baron von Hohenstein.
Talking G.I. Joe.
Yeah, he masqueraded as a real German aristocrat and passed with flying colors. The guy Drozdov was very fluent in German and could play a German to a T. And in fact, the upcoming movie Bridge of Spies, which of course details the exchange between the Soviets and the United States of
this
Gary
is the Spielberg Tom Hanks thing.
Spielberg film, which I'm sure will be chock full of Spielberg style propaganda, but the story is real in the sense that it details the exchange between Gary Powers, the U.S. U-2 pilot, and Rudolph Abel, whose real name was William Fisher, who was a Soviet illegal officer. He was a colonel in the KGB and arrested in 1957, and they were eventually exchanged, I believe, in 1962. And so the man on the eastern side, who was acting as a lawyer on the in the negotiations between the Soviets and the United States, he was supposedly an East German lawyer named Jürgen Dreves, was actually Drozdov. So Drozdov there was posing as a German lawyer. So that just shows the guy could masquerade as another nationality,
right?
German, very well.
Let's take a brief break here. You're listening to Mark Hackard.
Welcome to the Captain Obvious Health Minute. I'm Captain Obvious. A listener asks, how can she improve her sex life? The answer, dear, is have more sex. Nailed it. Another listener asks, how can I lose weight? I've tried everything. The answer, my friend, is have you tried eating fewer calories? Nailed it again. Another listener asks, my right foot experiences pain when I put weight on it. Well, don't put weight on it then. I'm on a roll. Somebody bill Medicaid. And finally, a listener wants to know, how do I stop my head from hurting so badly? Well, stop banging it against the wall. This is Captain Obvious, and if you're looking for an obviously superior source of superfoods, check out store.talknetwork.com. Until next time!
Gold and silver have stood the test of time as a reliable and safe store of value for personal wealth and protection. Precious metals are an excellent way to hedge against risky markets and uncertain times, and also provides a low-profile asset for enhanced financial privacy. IDP Consulting Group specializes in pure bullion products for physical delivery and commercial storage of gold and silver products for security and peace of mind. As an asset class, precious metals can never go to zero and have the potential to reward smart investors as global markets increasingly threaten conventional investment strategies. You can call IDP Consulting Group to learn more at 855-860-6800 or visit their website at idpconsultinggroup.com. Payment terms are easy and simple, and IDP promptly and discreetly ships all orders within the continental U.S. So call 855-860-6800. That's 855-860-6800 and put a gold and silver lining in your portfolio today.
All right, you're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer. You're listening to this on TalkNetwork.com. We are, of course, listener supported. So if you like what you're hearing and you want to hear more of this, then support my show and the network by going to TalkNetwork.com and choosing from the wide variety of products that we have listed there, everything from supplements to organics to you name it. And that will take you through to Natural News and their store. So we're talking with Mark Hackard of souloftheeast.org and espionagehistoryarchive.com. And Mark was telling us about Operation Scorpion and more of the work of Directorate S and the illegals. And so finish up that thought, Mark, and then we're going to talk about some more shady operations and how they tie into film.
So Operation Scorpion was a Soviet KGB Directorate S operation where they set up a fake Nazi organization and with the goal of penetrating the BND, and they did. Yuri Drozdov, who was one of the senior officers of Directorate S.
Now, for those who might not be aware, the BND, that's German intelligence.
Yes, exactly. That's the Bundesnachrichtendienst, which is called the Federal Intelligence Service. Okay. And which grew out of the Gehlen organization after World War II, which had its basis in the Wehrmacht Army's East intelligence section.
You mean Reinhard Gehlen?
Exactly, run by Reinhard Gehlen, who then worked after the war for the CIA and ran the Gehlen org, which became the BND. And so the KGB set up this fake Nazi international organization based in South America, and they first recruited using a Romeo technique, meaning romantic entrapment. They recruited a BND secretary who then supplied the KGB unknowingly to her. She didn't realize she was working for the KGB. So this is a false flag recruitment. But she supplied...
Now, wait a minute. You're saying that there's false flag recruitment?
Yeah. Could you imagine that?
Now, we know about false flags, but before you continue, tell the listeners what a false flag recruitment is.
Sure. Well, false flag recruitment is just that is a technique in espionage where you are recruiting an agent. You as an intelligence officer will recruit an agent under another identity. So say a Mossad agent wants to recruit someone in, an Arab country. This is typical. They won't pose as Mossad. They'll pose as they'll pose as the Germans or whoever.
Mossad have posed as CIA before. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's they're pretty good at. I'd say in human intelligence terms, it's as far as the top players, it's the Russians and Mossad as far as classic human espionage. So a false flag recruitment technique just means you're posing as something you're not in order to get someone on board and make them an agent of your intelligence network. Mm-hmm. And so KGB Directorate S recruited the secretary, and she supplied them with lots of information, including information on other BND personnel, and then they targeted, using that intelligence, they targeted a young BND officer who was a strong nationalist and who they thought would be receptive to their recruitment attempts into this bogus Nazi international organization. And it worked. And the guy, the BND officer, worked for decades as a mole in the BND for the KGB, even though at first he thought he was serving some sort of group of former Wehrmacht officers who were planning a resuscitation of some sort of Fourth Reich or something like that.
So this has actually been successful numerous times then in the history of espionage.
You bet. Yeah, that's kind of par for the course.
Right. Let me ask you this question: how, you and I have discussed this some in the past, but for the sake of listeners who may not have been familiar with this, one of the more alluring topics in this subject matter is sex espionage, right? Right. Ravens and swallows. How often, in your analysis as a specialist in this field, was this actually done on the part of Russian intelligence and perhaps even back to the NKVD? I've mentioned before, we do know about people who were even actresses, singers, who had been co-opted into this kind of work. In your research, how often do you think this has been done?
I think it's done quite often by all sides. Just given the weaknesses of human nature,
right?
That's and the emphasis on expediency and intelligence work. That's a quick way to compromise someone if you have the chance. With Russian intelligence, yes, even before the war, you had Russian intelligence, or rather, say NKVD agents who worked in the ballet, and they were able to monitor diplomats' connections with different ballerinas, and then make sure that they got what they needed as far as information goes, and as far as agent recruitment. So they were able to set that up well.
Now, in regards to popular film, we actually see this in the Avengers series, where Scarlett Johansson's character, Black Widow, was a Russian ballerina who was recruited into sex espionage.
Yeah, and there have been even Russian shows that have talked at some length about that. Sure, so it's not even secret anymore. Yeah, that.
Now, would this generally be girls who were perhaps in prostitution already, or maybe orphans? Would that be where you would draw from to get the people who might be willing to do this?
I think that was typically the case. Yes, sort of people at the margins.
Yeah.
Women who might have been in a vulnerable position, more or less, and or who were identified by the authorities as potentially useful. That always seems to be the way it goes, wherever you might be.
Now, we see that a lot in movies that deal with spy stories. I mean,
you have orphanages that are really spy schools.
Well, I don't think there's ever been a spy movie that didn't have sex espionage involved in it.
Oh yeah, everyone loves it, right?
But in the real world cases that you've seen, are you aware of any situations where seriously damaging intelligence was obtained through these means? Now, I know you've got a few pieces on this at your archive.
Yeah.
But tell us about one or two of those, if you would.
Absolutely. You have lots of cases where sexual compromise was used as a tool of recruitment and control. For example, I have documented a case from, I think it was the 1950s or maybe early 1960s, of a German secretary in NATO who was seduced by a KGB agent, KGB asset, who was actually a young Italian man, seduced this young German woman, and had a nice relationship with her, and was able to. He told her he was a journalist and he needed some documents. It would really help his work, and she, of course, gave them to him. Interestingly, I would make a point and say that it's kind of a rule that women and men sort of operate differently in this realm. Typically, you have to really compromise men, whereas with women, you can persuade them in a romantic sense, and they will cooperate on that basis and become agents on a romantic level. Whereas with men, you got to drive the point home and say, hey, if you don't do A, then B happens. In another case, you have the French ambassador in the Soviet Union, Maurice Dejean, who was also compromised by the KGB, I believe with a ballerina, but they sent in her supposed boyfriend to beat him up, and then someone else, I believe, or she said that, she knew people in the government who could help, but he would just have to do this, and so the French ambassador was hooked as a KGB agent, and he eventually he was somehow exposed and got sent home, and de Gaulle told him de Gaulle just dismissed it with a remark like, you can't control yourself around women, Dejean, or something like that. Just as well, there's a great story I have in one of my books, memoirs, by a KGB officer who was serving under diplomatic cover in Sweden, and he went to an American embassy party. I believe this was in the 60s or 70s. He went to an American embassy party and happened upon this really pretty girl and started talking to her, and he decided that he was going to initiate romantic contact, and he seduced her, and it turned out that she worked at the CIA station in Stockholm, and so she had access to enormous loads of information, and she was happy to pass it on. So you see with the case of the two women that it's a romantic thing. Mm-hmm. It's a real seduction, whereas with the men, it's you got to beat them over the head and show them the photos. And you have, for example, homosexuality was used, it's still used, of course, but John Vassell was a British agent in or rather, he was a KGB agent in the British Admiralty, who passed on information because he was compromised at the British Embassy in Moscow.
And with the Cambridge Five, there was homosexuality as well, as I understand.
Yes, Anthony Blunt and Guy Burgess were both homosexuals, as were. Well, I'm not sure about McLean. He may have had some of those inclinations, but.
All right, hold that thought. Welcome back. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I am Jay Dyer. We're talking to Mark Hackard, and we were just discussing sex espionage.
Welcome to the Health Minute. I'm Mike Adams, the Health Ranger, with my sidekick Tonto, not far behind. The topic today is, what about heavy metals in superfoods and nutritional supplements, and even certified organic products that are coming from China? Well, you may not be aware of this yet, but the Talk Network online store, which you'll find at store.talknetwork.com, uses our own private laboratory, where I am the lab science director, and we test everything that we sell for toxic heavy metals, such as lead, cadmium, arsenic, mercury, and even elements with radioactive isotopes, such as uranium, strontium, and cesium. And if it doesn't show up as really, really clean, we reject it. And yes, we test this with university-level equipment, ICP-MS instrumentation, sensitive down to parts per billion concentrations. So if you want really clean foods, superfoods, and nutritional supplements that are laboratory validated, get them now at store.talknetwork.com.
Luring topics, baby. Ooh, yeah. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk sexy. Well, actually, my normal voice is pretty sexy. So
oh, yeah.
So you were just talking about these different cases of where sex espionage actually was damaging to some power structure. I wanted to ask you what you thought about the Anna Chapman case. I listened to Annie Machon's take on it, and she kind of thought it was theatrical, which I tended to agree with her. What do you think about that whole scenario that was in the news so big a couple of years ago?
Yeah, I think with Chapman, she was a lower-level asset, and she was tricked by the FBI into thinking she was going to be used in in an operation by the SVR. So she very well could have been, yes, she could have been tasked with some different operational objectives, getting to know certain people, maybe pillow talk, that kind of stuff. But she wasn't real high up on the totem pole. I mean, she of course was the best looking of the bunch, and so she got her own TV show when she went back to Russia and stuff like that. But really, she wasn't an illegal herself. She was just a normal Russian girl.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she talks with an accent in English, and everyone.
Oh, right. Well, that would be. Yeah.
She was most certainly a Russian in her normal everyday life. The real illegals, people who were officers who were deep cover posing as American citizens.
You wouldn't know.
Exactly. It would be people like Donald Heathfield, whose real name was Andrei Bizrukov. And if I encourage listeners, if they can find him on YouTube, he's got some interesting lectures that he's been giving on international relations. And he's come out with a new book. But Bizrukov, Heathfield, was a seemingly successful businessman who went to Harvard for his master's and was developing business forecasting software and meeting with high-level power players. So those were the real illegals. Those were the real intelligence officers. Anna Chapman was just an asset used probably on a sometime basis by the SVR.
I got changing gears here. You posted a piece that I did that I was honored that you posted. I thought it was a little out there. I want to know what you think about the article that I wrote, Moonraker and the Breakaway Civilization.
Oh, I thought it was a really cool article. And yeah, of course it goes up at Espionage History Archive under spy culture and then in deep politics, because why not address the topic of deep politics, the undercurrents of the political scene and how things really happen, which ranges from anything from what you talk about in the deep space program to cults to various esoteric groups as well as
what about this idea of
organized crime?
Yeah, of an international criminal network that seems to have its octopus tentacles in different aerospace technologies, military-industrial complex type situations that might actually have a breakaway civilization mindset. Coming out of, we think about the Nazis, we think about the ideology being a new Reich. And we think about the Nazis going away. And certainly we aren't looking at some sort of Nazi power that's taking over the world. But when you mentioned earlier the technocrats, the Fabian Socialists, the Royal Society, and H.G. Wells, we actually kind of do see a breakaway civilization in the philosophy of H.G. Wells.
Absolutely. And you see a predatory oligarchic elite.
Yeah. So you think that actually? I think it does, but I want to hear Mark Hackard say. You think that actually ties into espionage?
Absolutely. That ties into espionage because those are if you permit the existence of a secret space program, which can simply mean that there's something beyond NASA that we don't know about.
Exactly.
Then you automatically you're getting into the traffic of secrets and as well as counterintelligence and keeping those things secret and hiding the true purpose and engaging in whatever.
And that's the whole rise of the space era, as I believe, as I understand, it really coincides with not just rockets and the Nazi V2 program, but with satellites. And the purpose of satellites is spying.
Yes. Yes, and then at a further points, the purpose is spying, and then also, of course, weaponization, their use in warfare, space, as a strategist will tell you, is the ultimate high ground.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, so the Star Wars Defense Initiative that supposedly, as we read, was birthed at Bohemian Grove with Nixon and different so-called right-wingers, Reagan at Bohemian Grove, discussing the weaponization of space, and that's why this matters. So certainly the Star Wars Defense Initiative is a real thing, very well known now, and then it's from the bowels of this that we get things like the internet, right? Because the internet actually ties into the satellite networks.
Yeah, all the fun gadgets we have were all military applications long ago. Right. And as far as the international scope of it, once you realize that the entire modern West is not, and much of the rest of the world, unfortunately, is not run by sovereign powers, but rather by international banksters, then who really hold authority and ultimate say and power, then you can. It's not a real leap in logic to say that they have their hands on technologies that are very, very high grade weapons technologies that we don't know about. That's not a leap at all.
Right. I mean, certainly, from in public understanding, the latest plane that we know about is like, the B-52, or not the stealth bomber, right? Or some
B-2.
Yeah, some updated stealth bomber from...
Right, which was unveiled about 25 years ago.
Exactly, right. So that's the latest thing, right? But,
yeah.
But when you can print the money, you've got pretty much a blank check on what you can do with black budgets. And that's really where a lot of this goes, the internet and these different things that have really revolutionized the world, as I've said many times, and as you just pointed out. These are artifacts of the spy world. The internet was a cryptographic communication technology that developed out of the military and spy world.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So you need look no further than the very device that you're listening to us discuss this topic on right now. Now, let's shift gears to this goofy story where we actually have a tie-in with Dolph Lundgren.
Oh, yeah.
And Jack Abramoff. Now, how might we get from that to from what we were talking about with Breakaway Civilizations to Dolph Lundgren and the notable scandal character of Jack Abramoff?
Well, I guess you could say that Jack Abramoff was really just an operative for these various oligarchic interests,
right?
Who have a deeper, darker program in mind for the world. But Abramoff, the funny thing is that a lot of people don't realize that Abramoff in the 1980s, in 1986, made around 87, 88 was when he was filming it, but made the film Red Scorpion. He was Abramoff, who was the big corrupt lobbyist in D.C., implicated in all kinds of scandals.
When was that big in the news? It was how many years ago?
About 10 years ago or so, 2006, I think, somewhere around there. Yeah, I think he's out of federal prison now. And he was last working at a kosher pizza place, and then he skipped town. Or I think legally he's in the clear. But Abramoff, back when he was in his late 20s, early 30s, he decided to shoot a movie with his brother, and so they came up with the idea of Red Scorpion with Dolph Lundgren, which is a
4-star Academy Award winning.
Yes, but which won all the Oscars in 1989. Yeah, Red Scorpion is it's just a really dumb movie about a Soviet Spetsnaz special forces soldier who's sent to a Soviet client state in Africa, a made-up country called Mombasa, to quell a rebellion there. And the idea behind that was that Abramov was looking to have it mirror Angola, where Angola was under a government of SWAPO forces, which were aligned with the Cubans and the Soviets, and the rebels were UNITA, and UNITA was supported by the CIA and the South Africans. And their leader was Jonas Savimbi, who would later be described as just, like a homicidal maniac. But Jack Abramoff thought he was a great guy. So he shot this movie and made a very, I guess as in whatever goofy terms it could be put in Red Scorpion, made a sympathetic portrayal of Jonas Savimbi as this rebel leader in fictional Mombasa that Dolph Lundgren, as the Spetsnaz soldier, decides to cross over and side with against his country and against the Soviet client state and against the Cubans. And so they actually did shoot it in Africa, in Namibia, which was under South African occupation at the time.
Wow.
And so it was supposed to be this propaganda piece, and was the money was put up in large measure by the International Freedom Foundation, which was basically this front tied to the CIA, which was run by Abramoff, and it cost something like $16 million. But there's a lot of weird stuff going on with Abramoff coordinating different initiatives with the Contras and the South African, or rather, the South African supported UNITA in Angola and also the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. It's just very shady what happened to all the supposed money that went into the movie, because no one, maybe Dolph Lundgren did, but no one else on the movie got paid, and Abramoff, of course, was a famous rip-off artist. But beyond that, movie studios and these film projects are quite often used as vehicles for money laundering.
Absolutely.
And channeling funds into other activities, whether they be organized crime or intelligence operations.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. So we're coming to the close here, Mark. Real quick, do you have a favorite spy movie?
Favorite spy movie? That's hard to say. I did enjoy Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. That was pretty good. From a few years back, the Le Carré movie. Yeah. I'll have to think, and maybe I'll write a piece on it. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're coming to the close here. Again, the sites are souloftheeast.org and espionagehistoryarchive.com. And my guest has been Mark Hackard. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer, and I run jaysanalysis.com. I want to be sure to remind listeners to check out talknetwork.com. Check out all the products that they have there, great prices, and you will also be forwarded over to Natural News. So definitely check out Natural News' articles. And this has been Esoteric Hollywood. And I want to thank listeners. Come back next time for more Esoterica in Hollywood.
Hi, this is Mike Adams, the Health Ranger, the co-founder of TalkNetwork.com, with a question and answer segment from our online store that you'll find at store.talknetwork.com. The question today is, what's the difference between chlorella and spirulina? Well, both are single-celled microalgae superfoods that are very rich in chlorophyll. But spirulina is much higher in iron, so it tends to be used by women who need to replenish their iron stores. Chlorella, on the other hand, is useful to both men and women because it's loaded with chlorophyll. It has chlorella growth factor in it, CGF, And it also contains enzymes, vitamins, and minerals, all in their plant-based form, their bioavailable form that your body can easily assimilate. It's much better than synthetic vitamins, and chlorella is a complete protein. Find them both at store.talknetwork.com.